My kitchen isn't anything all that special, but I wanted to see if adding some cabinet lights could make it look a lot better. These new cabinet lights from GE Cync work with Matter, so they work great in Apple Home, and the installation was pretty straightforward, but I did have a couple small challenges I had to overcome to get these to work in my space. And while these lights put out really great quality light, I want to talk through if I think these would be worth it for you to purchase and install in your kitchen, whether it's basic like mine or a lot nicer. If you're new here, I'm Eric Welander. I've been an app developer on Apple platforms since 2011 and building out my smart home here on YouTube since 2018. So if you're into Apple or smart home tech, consider subscribing. And thanks to GE Cync for sending me these lights to check out free of charge. This video is not sponsored. Now, there are two different kinds of lights that GE just released, the pucks as well as the bars, as GE calls them. The pucks come in one size, and it's a set of 3 little circles that you can screw into the top of your cabinets. Now, we're gonna focus on the bars in this video, which come in 3 different sizes. There's 12, 18, and 24 inches. And I requested one of the 12 and one of the 24-inch sizes to fit my kitchen. And as I mentioned at the front of the video, these lights work great as lights. Imagine that. It puts out a range of 2,000 to 7,000 Kelvin white light, which looks nice, and then up to 16 million colors. So you can set the mood for whatever kind of situation you want over the course of the day and night. So in the box, you get the light bar itself, of course, as well as some cables to connect it to either a wall outlet or your existing electrical wiring. And there's also a cable to connect this light to another one. You can chain up to 10 of these cabinet lights together. And I love how the power cords they supplied are flat, which means that they're easier to slip into small spaces, and the plug for the outlet is flat so that it can fit behind appliances like my refrigerator. But that gets me to the first problem I hit with my install. But before we talk about that, we need to add these to my smart home. I always say, if you're setting up a new product, always try to add the software part of it to your smart home before installing it. There might be some exceptions if you have to hire a professional installer to put these in your home, but ideally, you can make sure that the software works before physically changing your home and adding these to your home. And for me, it was very easy to just add these lights straight into Apple Home, scanning the Matter code. There's no need to install another app in this case. Of course, if you do want to keep up with software updates with these lights, which might be a good idea, then you can use the GE Cync app. But it's not something I did for testing these lights. Now, there's one other detail with the setup, which is that the Matter code is etched on the back of the lights, and then there's a sticker that's partially stuck to the lights on the front. So you might want to permanently use some tape or something to stick that to the front of the light, or somehow keep it in an app, let's say like HomePass, where you can store Matter codes. Because of course, if you need to re-add it to your smart home or pass it along to whoever moves into the home after you, then otherwise they'd have to take down all of these lights to get to the Matter code that's etched in the back of the light, as opposed to getting to something on the front. So a little bit maybe of an oversight from GE on where they etched the Matter code on these. But on the flip side, I'm glad that these lights are Matter and not specifically Apple Home, because for something like this that you actually install in something like cabinets, it's, I think, better to use Matter, because if someone else purchases your home in the future, they might not be as into Apple Home as you are, but might be preferring a different smart home platform. And then this gives them flexibility. And another thing to keep in mind is that each individual light here is its own Matter light that you have to add to Apple Home or whatever smart home platform you prefer. And we'll talk about how I deal with this in Apple Home in a minute. But back to that problem I was talking about. Well, the power sockets on either end of these light bars only go in one direction. So as you're holding the light facing you, the right side takes the power in, and the left side sends the power out to another light. And my outlet is on the left side of where I wanted to put my lights. So I can't chain them together, and the cable in the box is not long enough to snake around to the other side. Now, after some thinking about the situation, I decided to just install the lights in reverse. And this worked fine for me. And the facing in, well, maybe it looks a little bit different with how the lighting reflects on the counter. It's not something that really bothered me. I still get plenty of light diffusion across where the lights are showing. So I'm not too worried about it. And keep it in mind if you need to flip your lights around to get everything to work with your outlets. Now, that gets me to actually mounting the lights on your cabinet. So they attach to the cabinet with a single screw that's installed in the light on either end of the light bar. And you'll probably, as GE recommends, need to drill some tiny pilot holes into your cabinets first so that you can accurately put in those screws exactly where you want the lights. Now, finding the position for these pilot holes by measuring the different distances of where the screws are on the light and then where they should go in your cabinets to have them centered and everything is not easy. It's a lot of bending over and then actually drawing the spot where you want the hole. And that whole part is definitely tricky, but once you're done with it, it's done. Now, speaking of being done with it, I got the first light installed, no problem. Drilled the pilot holes, screwed it in, easy and done. And that was the shorter version, the 12-inch one. Now going to the larger light bar that I had, I went through and drilled the pilot holes and connected the first screw, no problem. Now with the second screw, I was putting it in the pilot hole and the front of the light, which again I had facing backward, looked like it was kind of bowing or dipping down a little bit from the surface of the cabinet, and I wanted to keep tightening the screw to secure it more. And then it snapped and the light started to fall, of course. And I don't necessarily blame GE for this because a screw's a screw, and I don't know, maybe they could have had more sturdy screws, but I think that's plenty for what they need. Just, it's a warning to you if you install these lights that you don't want to over tighten the screws, and just make sure that your pilot holes are big enough that the screws aren't super tight inside of the pilot hole. But I still wanted to get this light installed because my wife and children were away from the home for a limited amount of time and I needed to get this done, and trying to remove the remainder of the screw stuck in my cabinet just wasn't working. It's just really in there tight. So I used some 3M command strips to hold the light in, and so far this has worked fine. But I can understand why GE doesn't include some kind of an adhesive mounting option for these, just because with a kitchen you're dealing with temperatures going up and down with, let's say, things you're cooking. I wouldn't try and use these command strips near something like a stove maybe, but it was helpful, at least for me so far, in a pinch if you hit some problem like this. But what I'm getting at is if you're renting and wary of drilling holes in your cabinets, I don't know if getting these, planning to install them with adhesive, would really be a great idea. Okay, so now that I had my lights installed in my cabinets, I used that little hack with the 3M command strips to get them to stay where they need to go. And I've already added them in Apple Home, but they're still separate lights. And of course, with 2 lights, it's not that big of a deal, but you might have many more lights that you have to add. And so in Apple Home, you have the option to group any number of lights together. So I grouped these 2 lights. And then for an automation, I used my Aqara millimeter wave sensor that I have in the kitchen to detect if there's a presence of people, then it will turn on the cabinet lights. And then when the people go away, the cabinet lights turn off. This is going to be more accurate, especially for still motion of someone just standing still in the kitchen, than something like a motion sensor, which is just looking for movement. And a lot of people have this dream that they can do this with all the lighting in their home, right? You just walk into a room and all the lights turn on exactly how you want, and then you leave and they all turn off. And generally speaking, I find that annoys people a lot if you do it with overhead lights, especially maybe those people you might live with that aren't as into smart home tech as you are. But it's actually really nice to do with things like cabinets and accent lighting, because then it adds some nice ambient lighting when it's dark, but then also just add some nice lights to see things on the counter in this case when it's light. So People don't tend to care as much if that's going on and off automatically, but that might be more annoying if it's all the lights in the room and then they're left in the dark. And in my experience of a little over a week of using these lights, they've been very responsive with Matter communicating with Apple Home. So the Aqara sensor sees a person and the lights turn on. It almost feels like those lights are always on because when people are in the room, they're on, but they do actually turn off when we're not there. Now, I did notice something else that's a detail with Apple Home and controlling these lights is that when I set it to be a certain color, as opposed to a particular shade of white light with a Kelvin value, I do feel like the lights are just slightly dimmer from what I can see than with the white values. I don't know if it's like less LEDs or something to portray either certain colors, or maybe this is an issue with Apple Home communicating with those lights over Matter, but it's just a detail I noticed that I wanted to point out. But overall, the lighting performance of these is wonderful. I get fast response times and the light is nice and diffused across my counter. And look at how nice this light is. If I'm just sitting like this casually on a FaceTime call, of course, wouldn't really do that. But one of the other things I wish GE would include in the box with these are some cable ties. They actually do include these little sticky cable ties with the can lights, and I ended up using those for these light bars. But if you just buy the light bars, you're gonna have to get something on your own to manage the cables and connect them and tie them to your cabinets. One other nice feature that these lights have is a physical button on the light to turn it on and off. But of course, if you turn on one, it's only gonna turn on that one light. It doesn't turn on both of the lights. And then there's also a button here to toggle between different lighting modes. So I can go through these different modes that GE has set up with these lights. And I think if you're looking for a DIY cabinet lighting option, these could be a really nice thing to install, especially if you have available outlets, maybe tucked behind some appliances or something that you can run the power to for these. Then you don't even have to worry about wiring it into your electrical system. But all this said, my wife and I recently did a staycation just into downtown. We live in the Chicago suburbs, and we stayed at this nice hotel that had cabinet lighting in a lot of the different shelves. And I was noticing all the attention to detail of these lights and how they were running the cables. And you can really step up all the details with cabinet lights. And so depending on your setup, it might also be a deceptively bigger project than you might think, because trying to find the right place for the cables, or maybe in my case, if I had just cut a little slit in the cabinet here or there to run some of the cable, it would make it look a little bit nicer. But then of course it takes more time and effort and potential for things to go wrong. So just some things to consider of balancing what you have the time for and capability for with then what you set as a standard of how you want this to look. But I think if you invest the time and the attention to detail, there's nothing that these lights have that's holding you back, aside from the fact that the wiring has to go one way. And if that really is a deal breaker for you, I think you might want to consider the circle can lights, because those from GE Cync work the same way with Matter, but then you can turn them either way. So you might have a little more flexibility in wiring those, even though they might not be quite as diffused of lighting. And of course, I have links to both lights down in the description below if you want to check them out. And if you're curious about that Aqara sensor, I have a video I made about it a while ago, linked somewhere here on the screen. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Thanks again so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.